For 2 years, my boss called me Melissa. My name isn't Melissa. At first, I thought it was a one-off slip. We'd only spoken a handful of times when I joined the company, and he had a habit of breezing past people like they were furniture. But then it became a thing, like he had carved Melissa into his brain and refused to make room for anything else. Every email, every meeting, every casual hallway nod, Melissa. I worked in the admin wing of a mid-sized insurance firm in Phoenix, the kind of place where fluorescent lights hummed over endless rows of cubicles. My role was mostly behind the scenes, payroll reports, scheduling, onboarding new hires. I was good at it. Invisible, maybe, but indispensable. If anything got processed smoothly, I was somewhere in the chain. Not that my boss, Greg, seemed to notice. The funny part was, other people noticed. They'd shoot me sympathetic glances during team huddles when he'd thank Melissa for the quarterly stats. Once, our HR manager corrected him mid-sentence, and he just laughed like it was an inside joke he wasn't letting us in on. I stopped correcting him myself. It felt like trying to steer a parked car. I didn't take it personally, at least not at first. Greg was busy. He had regional metrics to chase, golf buddies to impress, and a calendar full of things more important than learning the actual name of the person who made sure his expense reports didn't bounce. Still, a part of me kept wondering if my invisibility was a feature of the job or a reflection of me. Then one Tuesday morning, halfway through my second year, Greg knocked on my cubicle wall with his trademark fake cheer and said, "Melissa, you've always been such a rock for this team. I'd like to ask you for a favor." And that's when things started to get weird. I swiveled my chair toward him, coffee mug still in hand. Greg almost never came down to our end of the floor unless something had gone wrong. He leaned on the edge of my desk like we were old friends. "I'm applying for a board position," he said, "and I need a strong reference. Someone who can vouch for my leadership and—" He made a vague circling motion with his hand. "My impact here." I blinked at him, the words catching in my head like static. This man, who had never once used my real name, wanted me to tell strangers about his leadership skills. I took a slow sip of coffee to keep from laughing. "You want me to be your reference?" "Exactly," he said, beaming. "You've been with me for years. You know how I operate." Technically, I'd been with the company for years. Him? Not so much. Greg had been parachuted in 18 months after I started, and while we were technically part of the same team, our professional relationship mostly consisted of him sending requests through 3 layers of people before they landed on my desk. I said nothing for a beat too long, and he filled the silence. "It would mean a lot to me, Melissa. This is an important step for my career." He even gave me that earnest, brow-furrowed look he probably practiced in the mirror. I promised I'd think about it, and watched him walk away, his phone already at his ear. The moment he was out of earshot, I let out a laugh that startled the new hire across from me. The absurdity was one thing, but the nerve, that was something else entirely. And yet, the more I sat with it, the more I realized there was a strange kind of leverage in being asked. That afternoon, I pulled up his request in my mind like it was an email I hadn't answered yet. A reference. For Greg. From me. I pictured the call, some board member asking about his leadership, and me deciding whether to be polite, honest, or creative. I wasn't vindictive by nature, but there was something about the whole Melissa thing that made this feel like a cosmic setup. It wasn't just the wrong name. It was the way he never seemed to notice the actual people who made his job possible. If I disappeared tomorrow, his first sign would be a missed meeting because his calendar didn't update. By the end of the day, word had spread, probably because Greg had dropped hints to half the office that he was in the running for some prestigious position. My desk neighbor, Denise, popped her head over the cubicle wall. "So you're gonna do it?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "It's not every day you get asked to vouch for someone who doesn't know your name," she smirked. "You should put that in the reference." That night, I couldn't shake it. The request had shifted something in me. For years, I'd been the background operator, efficient, invisible, safe. Now, suddenly, the man who'd overlooked me was asking me to help him look good to strangers. It wasn't about payback. It was about the rare chance to decide how visible I wanted to be. And for once, I wasn't sure I wanted to blend into the wallpaper. The next morning, Greg was in unusually high spirits. He strolled through the office with a paper cup of something expensive looking and tossed, "Good morning, Melissa," over his shoulder like confetti. I didn't bother correcting him. At this point, it felt like a prop in a play only I knew I was in. I had an inbox full of month-end reports to process, but my mind kept drifting back to the reference request. If I agreed, I'd essentially be a co-signer on his self-promotion. If I refused, I'd probably be written off as uncooperative, which wasn't a label I wanted floating around in HR. Around mid-morning, I caught him in the break room talking to one of the regional managers. "And Melissa's been here since the dawn of time. Knows this place inside and out," he said, nodding toward me like I was a reliable old filing cabinet. I smiled politely and poured myself more coffee. It was weird. He wasn't being malicious. He genuinely thought he was paying me a compliment. That almost made it worse. Later, I drafted a quick pros and cons list in my notebook. Pro: he might owe me a favor down the line. Con: he'd keep calling me Melissa until the day I retired. Pro: it could be a chance to showcase my own role in the company. Con: that would require me to put energy into polishing his image. By lunch, I decided to at least ask him for the details. Who would call me, what they'd want to know. The way I saw it, knowing my audience would help me decide how to play it. When I stopped by his office, he lit up like I'd just saved him from a fire. "Melissa, so glad you came by. You're gonna love this opportunity." Opportunity. That was one word for it. Greg slid a printed sheet across his desk. It was a short bio of the nonprofit board he was aiming to join. Something about community impact and strategic vision. He'd highlighted a paragraph about the interview process. "They'll call you this week," he said. "It's just a quick chat. They'll probably ask about my leadership, my problem-solving skills, the usual." I scanned the page. The contact listed was the board's vice chair, a woman named Patricia Klein. There was also a section about valuing collaboration across all levels of the organization. The irony practically hummed off the paper. I asked, "And you want me to focus on your leadership style?" He nodded, oblivious. "Yes, you've seen me in action. You can talk about how I delegate, how I empower people." I almost laughed. If his version of empowering people was sending them tasks without context, then sure, I'd seen plenty. But something about the setup intrigued me. This wasn't just about him getting a gold star. Whoever called would be gauging credibility, maybe even reading between the lines. "All right," I said slowly. "I'll take the call." His relief was instant. "Knew I could count on you, Melissa." Back at my desk, I tucked the paper into a folder and sat for a long moment. I had a choice to make, not between helping or sabotaging, but between keeping the same low profile I'd always had, or letting someone outside our walls see exactly how this place worked. And if they happened to learn my actual name in the process, well, that would just be a bonus. The call came 2 days later, right after lunch. Patricia Klein's voice was warm but businesslike. "Thanks for making time to speak with me. You've worked with Greg for quite a while, yes?" I paused for half a beat. "I've been with the company for over 4 years. Greg joined about a year and a half into my time here." I didn't correct her assumption that we were closely linked. It wasn't exactly untrue, but it set the stage. She asked about his strengths first. I kept my tone even factual. "Greg is confident in decision-making. He's comfortable taking charge of situations." Then I added, "He's very focused on high-level goals." That last part was true, though I let her interpret what "focused" meant. When she asked for examples of his collaboration, I gave one that was accurate but incomplete. "We don't work side by side daily, but when our departments intersect, he's clear about what outcome he wants." I left out the part about vague instructions and delegated follow-up to whoever happened to be standing nearby. Somewhere in the middle of the call, she referred to me as Melissa. That's when I realized Greg had given her that name. I smiled into the receiver. "Actually, it's Marcy," I said. No irritation, just a correction, like I was straightening a picture frame. There was a small pause before she said, "Oh, thank you, Marcy." The rest of the call went smoothly. I wasn't gushing, but I wasn't tanking him either. Just honest enough to be credible, careful enough to avoid giving him ammunition later. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I expected. I hadn't gone out of my way to make him look bad, but I'd made sure my name was the one Patricia remembered. Greg didn't ask about the call right away, which told me one of two things. Either Patricia had nothing alarming to report, or he assumed I had sung his praises without question. Given his general lack of curiosity about details, I leaned toward the latter. 2 days later, he appeared in my cubicle again, hands in his pockets like we were catching up over coffee. "Melissa, I appreciate you taking that call," he said. Patricia seemed pleased. "Glad to help," I said, keeping my face neutral. I didn't bother fixing the name this time. It wasn't the hill I wanted to die on. Not when Patricia already knew the truth. The office hum rolled on around us, but I noticed something subtle. People had started greeting me more. Denise asked about the board process in passing. One of the junior analysts stopped by to thank me for an onboarding spreadsheet I'd sent. It was like, in the smallest way, my stock had gone up, simply because I'd been pulled into something outside my usual lane. That weekend, I ran into Patricia's name again, this time in a LinkedIn notification. She'd viewed my profile. No message, just the quiet ping of someone remembering me. The following week, Greg got the position. He announced it in a mass email with an over-enthusiastic subject line, "Big news!" and a paragraph about representing our company in the community. Buried halfway through, there it was. "Special thanks to Melissa for being my reference." I read it twice, smiling. It didn't bother me anymore. In fact, it was almost funny. He still didn't know, but now someone outside these walls did. And that felt like a start. A few days after his big announcement, Greg was busier than ever. His calendar filled with board orientation, meetings, and networking lunches. He spent less time in the office, which, honestly, was a bonus for everyone. One afternoon, while he was out, I got an email from Patricia, short and to the point. "Enjoyed our conversation. Would love to connect sometime about your role here. Think it's more significant than Greg made it sound." I stared at it for a long moment. That one sentence said more than she probably realized. She'd picked up on the gaps in his version of events. More importantly, she'd remembered my name, my actual name. I replied politely, offering to meet for coffee if she was ever in our part of town. No agenda, no overt ambition, just opening a door. When I told Denise, she grinned. "So the board lady saw through the fog?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she's just curious." Either way, the interaction shifted something in my head. For years, I'd operated in the background, making sure systems ran without anyone needing to know who was behind them. But now I had proof. Sometimes, the right people do notice, even if they're not the ones signing your paychecks. That week, I updated my LinkedIn profile for the first time in ages. Not to make a move, but to make sure that if anyone came looking, they'd see the work I actually did, not the version filtered through Greg's highlight reel. It wasn't about leaving. It was about making myself visible on my own terms. A week later, Greg stopped by my desk in a rush, suit jacket half on, phone in hand. "Melissa, can you send me that staffing report from last quarter? The board's asking about our retention numbers." "Sure," I said, already pulling up the file. I didn't correct him. Not worth it now. As I emailed it over, I pictured Patricia reading those numbers, maybe remembering our conversation. I wondered if she noticed how much of the work tied back to processes I built. Probably not in detail, but enough to know Greg wasn't the sole architect of the success he was presenting. That Friday, I saw his name on the company intranet under a new headline. "Greg Matthews represents, company name, at Community Leadership Luncheon." There was a photo of him at a podium, smiling big. Off to the side, barely in frame, was a banner listing all the board members' names, including Patricia's. Later that afternoon, Patricia sent me another short note. "Saw your name on some reports today. Impressive work." Just that. No mention of Greg, no pretense. It was the kind of validation you don't get often in corporate life, and it landed harder than I expected. By the time I shut down my computer for the weekend, I realized something. Greg might never learn my name, but people who mattered in ways he didn't anticipate already had, and that was worth more than any line in his board bio. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even planning a move, but I was starting to think about what might happen if I stopped letting other people write my story for me. 2 months later, Patricia emailed again, this time with a direct invitation. The board was forming a subcommittee to review operational workflows for local nonprofits, and she thought my organizational skills would be invaluable. It wasn't a job offer, just a volunteer role, but the kind that put you in rooms with people who made decisions. I accepted without hesitation. It was extra work, sure, but it was work with purpose, and outside Greg's shadow. The first meeting was at a downtown conference center. I walked in, signed my name on the badge, and for the first time in a long while, saw it printed clearly in bold, Marcy Grant. Patricia greeted me warmly and introduced me to the rest of the committee. No one called me Melissa. No one treated me like background. They asked questions, listened to my answers, and jotted notes when I explained a scheduling system that could save them weeks of chaos. Afterward, as I packed up my notes, Patricia said, "I'm glad Greg recommended you, even if he undersold your contributions." I smiled. "I'm just glad we connected." On the drive home, the desert sun was dipping low over Phoenix, and I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in. I hadn't corrected Greg's mistake out of spite or ego. It just worked out that way. He still breezed past my desk some mornings with a, "Thanks, Melissa." But now, it rolled off me, because outside our office walls, in circles he didn't control, the right people knew exactly who I was, and that was all I needed.